The sign hit the asphalt with a hollow metallic clang, and for a second, nobody said a word as the sheriff brushed the dust off his hands and stepped back like he'd just corrected something that never should have existed in the first place. And that's when I knew this whole thing was finally over. But 72 hours earlier, that same stretch of road smelled like fresh tar and bad decisions, and the first thing I saw wasn't justice. It was a white metal post being driven straight into ground eye. Paid for, built, and bled over. The kind of clean, straight road you don't get unless someone knows exactly what they're doing with grade, drainage, and patience. The kind of road I spent 8 months carving through limestone and clay just to make sure no one else ever told me how to access my own property again. And yet there it was, bolted into the shoulder like a flag planted by someone who had never touched a shovel in their life. HOA private access only. Black letters, bold, confident, and completely wrong. The smell of hot asphalt still hung in the air from where I'd sealed it 2 weeks before, and the crunch under my boots sounded different that morning, sharper, like the ground itself knew something was off. I stood there staring at it, running the math in my head like I always do. Easements, setbacks, county filings, everything lined up the way I built it. And none of it included a homeowners association claiming authority over a road that wasn't even in their jurisdiction. Not legally, not physically, not even by accident. But that didn't stop them. It never does. Because people like Vanessa Whitmore don't wait for permission. They create the illusion of it. And if you don't push back fast enough, that illusion becomes reality. I could already picture her standing there earlier that morning, sunglasses on, clipboard tucked under her arm, directing some contractor to just put the sign right there. Like she owned the place, like she owned me, and that was the install that looks permanent until you know exactly where to apply pressure. And I almost laughed, because this wasn't about a sign. It was about control, about someone deciding that if they acted official enough, loud enough, no one would question it. And maybe that works on most people. Maybe it works on neighbors who just want a quiet life. But I don't build things halfway. And I don't let anyone rewrite ownership with a piece of painted metal and a confident tone. I pulled out my phone, took a picture, then another, wide angle this time, capturing the road, the property line marker, the tree line. I surveyed myself. Every detail exactly where it should be. Because if there's one thing I've learned after years of building infrastructure in places where mistakes cost more than money, it's this. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be documented. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that this road wasn't just mine. It was protected in ways she hadn't even thought to check. And that sign she planted like a claim was already the evidence that would take her whole operation down in front of a camera she wouldn't be able to ignore. I built that road with my own hands and my own money, and every inch of it meant something long before anyone thought they could stick a sign in it and call it theirs. Because where most people saw a strip of asphalt cutting through dirt, I saw 8 months of early mornings, diesel engines humming before sunrise, and survey stakes lined up like quiet promises that I was finally doing things on my own terms. My name is Ethan Caldwell, 38 years old, civil engineer by trade and stubborn by nature. And after spending over a decade building infrastructure for other people, highways I would never drive and access roads I would never use, I decided it was time to build something that actually belonged to me. The property sat just outside county limits, 10 acres of uneven land with a slight grade that most buyers avoided because access was a problem. No clean entry, no maintained road, just a rough dirt path that turned to mud every time it rained. But when I walked it, the first time, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground, I could already see the line of where the road should go, where water would drain, where the base needed reinforcement. It was not guesswork. It was instinct sharpened by years of doing this for a living. And I bought it knowing exactly what it would take to make it right. I cleared it myself, rented the equipment, ran the compactor until my arms vibrated at night, laid the base layer carefully so it would hold through every season. And when the asphalt finally went down, smooth and dark under the Texas sun, there was this moment where the heat shimmered off the surface and I could smell that fresh, almost sweet scent of new pavement. And I remember thinking, this is mine, not managed, not shared, not dictated by anyone with a clipboard and a title they gave themselves. That was the whole point of buying outside the subdivision line. The HOA boundary stopped over 200 yards from where my property began, clean, documented, undeniable. I checked it 3 times before closing. Pulled the county maps, verified the deed, made sure there were no easements, no shared access agreements, nothing that could be twisted later, because I have seen how fast things can go wrong when paperwork is ignored or misunderstood. I did not want neighbors telling me how wide my driveway should be or what color my mailbox had to be. I wanted control over what I built and how I used it. And for a while, that is exactly what I had. Quiet mornings with nothing but the sound of gravel under tires and wind moving through the trees. No traffic, no interruptions, just a clean stretch of road leading exactly where I needed it to go. Until Vanessa Whitmore decided that line on a map did not apply to her. And the first time I heard her voice was not even directed at me. It was drifting across the property line as she stood with two contractors near the edge of my road, explaining in that calm, practiced tone how this access point would benefit the community, how it would improve flow, how everything would be brought up to standard, like she was describing a project already approved, already owned. And that was the moment I realized she was not asking for anything. She was declaring it. And people like that do not stop unless something stops them. But I did not move yet. I just watched, listened, and let her believe, for a little while longer, that she was in control. Vanessa Whitmore did not raise her voice when she spoke, and that was the first thing that made people listen to her, because she never needed to sound aggressive to take control. She dressed like she was walking into a closing meeting every hour of the day, pressed blazer even in 90-degree heat, sunglasses that never quite showed her eyes, and a clipboard that seemed to follow her everywhere like it was part of her identity. The kind of person who smiled while correcting you and made it feel like you were the one who had made a mistake just by standing in the wrong place. She had been the president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association for almost 4 years, unopposed, because no one else wanted the job, and she had turned that vacancy into authority, not the kind written in bylaws, but the kind built on repetition and confidence. She enforced rules that were real and some that were not. And after a while, no one could tell the difference anymore. I learned quickly that she was not just managing a neighborhood. She was shaping it into something that reflected her idea of order: uniform lawns, identical mailboxes, clean lines, controlled access, everything predictable and contained. And my road, my property, sat right outside that boundary like a loose thread she could not stand to leave alone. The first time she actually addressed me directly, she did not step onto my land. She stopped right at the edge, heels balanced carefully on gravel like she was avoiding stepping into something beneath her, and she gave me that polite, almost rehearsed smile, the kind that feels practiced in a mirror. "Ethan, right. We have been meaning to speak with you about this access point." She said it like we had already agreed there was something to discuss, like I had missed a meeting where decisions had already been made. I did not answer right away, just watched the way her contractors stood behind her, waiting, tools idle, like they were taking cues from her instead of any actual plan. "This road is private," I said finally, simple, direct, the kind of statement that should end a conversation, but it did not even slow her down. She tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Of course, but it connects directly to our subdivision entrance, which makes it a shared concern." The word shared hung there for a second, like it was supposed to make sense on its own, like saying it was enough to make it true. She tapped her clipboard lightly, papers shifting under her hand. "We are just bringing it up to community standard, improving flow, ensuring compliance. It will benefit everyone." There was no question in her voice, no request, just a statement dressed as cooperation. And that was when I understood exactly what she was doing. She was not asking for permission. She was creating a narrative where permission was unnecessary, where action came first and legality could be sorted out later. Because most people do not fight something once it looks official, once signs go up, once security shows up, once paperwork starts arriving. They assume it has already been approved somewhere higher up, and the day before, except this time there were two, one on each side of the road, creating a narrow choke point that forced every vehicle to slow down, to acknowledge the claim being made. And that was the strategy, not force, not confrontation, just presence, repeated until it felt permanent. I walked down the slope, gravel shifting under my boots, the air still cool but already carrying that faint chemical scent of fresh paint and treated metal, and before I could even speak, the contractor gave me a quick nod like we were on the same team. "Just following instructions, sir. We are finishing the access markers," he said, not looking up from his work, like the sentence had been rehearsed. access markers, I repeated, letting the words sit there for a second, because that was how it started, not with ownership, but with language. Redefine the space, rename the structure. And people begin to accept the change without questioning the foundation. I looked past him and saw a black SUV parked. Further up, engine running, tinted windows, and a man in a security uniform standing beside it, arms crossed, watching the road like he had been assigned to protect something that did not belong to him. That was new. That was escalation. I felt that shift again, that quiet tightening in my chest that told me this was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a plan unfolding exactly the way she intended. Vanessa stepped out of the SUV a moment later, heels clicking lightly against the asphalt. Clipboard already in hand, sunglasses reflecting the road back at me like a mirror I did not recognize. "Ethan, I was just about to call you," she said, her voice smooth, almost pleasant, but there was something underneath it now, something firmer, like she had crossed a line in her own mind and decided there was no reason to step back. "We are implementing temporary access control until everything is properly integrated." She gestured toward the barricades, the signs, the security guard, all of it, arranged just enough to look official from a distance. "This is not your property to control," I said, keeping my voice steady, because raising it would only give her something to work with, something to frame. She smiled again, but this time it did not reach her eyes. "Then you should not have a problem letting the county sort that out," she replied, like she was offering me a favor, like this entire situation was something I had created by resisting her version of order. The security guard shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, and I noticed the small detail that mattered. No county insignia, no official badge, just a private company logo stitched onto his uniform. And that was when it became clear. Everything here was designed to look legitimate without actually being backed by anything real. A performance built on confidence and repetition. And for most people, that would be enough. They would see the signs, the guard, the barricades, and assume the decision had already been made somewhere above them. But I stood there, listening to the idle engine, smelling the faint mix of exhaust and fresh paint, and I knew something she did not, because every piece she had put in place, every sign, every barrier, every so-called control point, was not just a claim, it was evidence, and the more she added, the stronger my position became. This was no longer about stopping her. This was about letting her go just far enough that when the truth came down on her, there would be no room left to argue. By the afternoon, the first letter showed up in my mailbox. Thick paper, official looking, the kind that is meant to make your stomach tighten before you even open it. And when I pulled it out, I could still smell the faint trace of fresh ink, like it had been printed just hours earlier. The envelope stamped with the HOA logo, clean, centered, confident. I stood there for a second with it in my hand, the quiet of the property pressing in around me, and then I tore it open slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I already knew exactly what it was going to say. Violation notice, unauthorized private control of community access route, immediate compliance required, potential fines escalating daily, and at the bottom, Vanessa's name printed in that same neat, deliberate font, like she had already filed this outcome in her mind before I even had a chance to respond. I let out a breath through my nose, folded the paper once, then again, not crumpling it, not reacting, just processing. Because this was her next move, not physical control, but administrative pressure, something that could be repeated, documented, stacked until it felt overwhelming. I walked back out to the road, the sun now higher, heat rising off the asphalt in visible waves. And the security SUV was still there, parked like it had every right to be. The guard now stopping a delivery truck halfway down the road, asking questions, checking something on a clipboard that did not belong to any official system. And the driver looked confused, hesitant, like he was already second-guessing whether he was allowed to be there at all. And that was exactly the effect she wanted: create doubt, slow everything down, make access feel conditional instead of absolute. I stepped closer, just enough for the guard to notice me, and he straightened slightly, polite but firm. "Sir, this is a controlled access road now," he said, repeating the phrase like it had been drilled into him. "Controlled access," I echoed quietly, tasting the words again. The way they tried to reshape reality just by being spoken enough times. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded once and turned away, because arguing here would not change anything. It would only feed into the narrative she was building, that this was a dispute between neighbors instead of a clear violation of property rights. Back inside, I spread the letter out on the table, next to the original deed, the survey documents, the county filings I had printed months ago when I first bought the land. The contrast was almost ridiculous. Her claim built on assumption and repetition. Mine built on measurements, coordinates, and recorded boundaries that did not shift based on opinion. I ran my finger along the property line on the survey, tracing the exact point where the HOA boundary stopped, more than 200 yards away, clean, untouched, undeniable. And that was when I made the decision that changed everything. I was not going to fight her immediately. I was not going to remove the signs. I was not going to escalate in a way that gave her control of the narrative. Instead, I was going to let her continue, let her add more signs, more letters, more so-called enforcement, because every step she took without legal authority was not strengthening her position. It was building mine, piece by piece, document by document, until the moment came when the difference between what looked official and what actually was official would become impossible to ignore. By the second day, the road no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a stage, and every move Vanessa made was louder, more deliberate, like she was building something she expected people to believe simply because it kept growing. More signs went up before noon, not just at the entrance but spaced along the shoulder, each one identical, each one reinforcing the same message until it started to look permanent, and the sound of metal being driven into the ground echoed across the property in sharp, repetitive strikes that carried farther than they should have. I stood at a distance this time, leaning against the bed of my truck, watching the pattern instead of the action, counting how many, noting where they were placed, because placement matters, especially when someone is trying to create the illusion of jurisdiction. A pickup truck I did not recognize rolled through slowly, the driver hesitating when he saw the signs, then stopping near the security vehicle, window rolling down. Halfway as the guard stepped forward again, repeating the same line, controlled access, community route, and the driver nodded like he understood, like he accepted it without question, then turned around and left. And that was the moment I realized the real damage was not physical, it was behavioral. People were already adjusting to something that was not real, already changing their decisions based on authority that did not exist, and Vanessa knew it. She was not just putting up signs, she was training responses. I could see her further down the road, speaking with another contractor, gesturing toward the tree line like she was mapping out the next step, maybe lighting, maybe more barriers, maybe something even more visible. And every move she made followed the same pattern: act first, reinforce quickly, repeat until no one questions it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another email, another notice, this one more formal, referencing potential legal action if I interfered with what she now called established access infrastructure. The language had shifted again, more confident, more final, like she believed the repetition itself had already made it true. I opened it, read it once, then again, not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to see how far she was willing to go on paper, because paper leaves a trail. And trails matter when things eventually get reviewed by someone who actually understands the difference between a claim and a right. I walked back toward the house slowly, boots pressing into the gravel shoulder. I had compacted myself, feeling that same steady rhythm under each step, and I thought about how easy it would be to stop this right now, to pull every sign out, to call the county, to force an immediate confrontation. But that would end it too early, it would limit what she exposed. And right now, she was exposing everything, her methods, her assumptions, her complete disregard for boundaries that had been clearly defined long before she ever set foot near this road. Inside, I set my phone on the counter and opened my laptop, pulling up the county records again, cross-checking the parcel map, zooming in on the exact coordinates. And there it was, unchanged, clean, precise. The line that separated her authority from mine, and it did not move just because she decided to ignore it. I started organizing everything, photos, timestamps, copies of her notices, every detail aligned in a way that told a story she could not rewrite later. And as I worked, I could still hear the faint echo of metal and gravel outside, the continued construction of something that looked official but had no foundation, and I let it continue. Because the stronger her illusion became, the harder it would collapse when it finally met something real. It was late that evening when the first real crack showed up, not in her signs or her setup, but in the paperwork, and it came quietly, the kind of detail most people would miss because they are too focused on what is happening in front of them instead of what is written underneath it. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the only light coming from the overhead fixture casting a soft glow across the documents spread out in front of me. The faint smell of coffee, still hanging in the air, long gone cold, and I had her latest notice pulled up on my laptop, reading it again line by line, slower this time, not looking for what it said, but for what it assumed, because that is where mistakes hide, in assumptions dressed up like facts. She referenced an easement, not directly, not clearly, but enough to imply that some form of shared access right existed, something that justified everything she had been doing out there, the signs, the guard, the control, and I leaned back slightly, letting that word sit in my mind for a second, easement, because that is not something you guess about. It either exists or it does not, and if it does, it is recorded, documented, tied to the land in a way that does not disappear just because someone forgets it. I reached for the original deed again, the paper slightly worn, to become impossible for her to defend, because once that question was asked in the right place, by the right person, everything else she had done would not just look wrong, it would be provably, undeniably outside her authority, and that is the kind of mistake you do not recover from once it is exposed. The next morning, I did not step outside right away. I stayed inside with the blinds slightly open, watching the road through a narrow gap, while the early light stretched across the asphalt I had laid myself. And for a few minutes everything was still, quiet in that way it gets just before activity starts, until the first vehicle rolled up, not a contractor this time, not a delivery truck, but a county utility pickup, slow, cautious. The driver easing forward like he was not sure if he was allowed to be there. And then he stopped at the barricade, window halfway down, speaking to the same security guard who now looked more confident than he had the day before, posture straighter, voice firmer, repeating the same lines that had no real authority behind them, but sounded official enough to delay anyone who did not know better. I watched the exchange closely, not the words, but the hesitation, the way the driver nodded, unsure, then reached for something inside his cab, probably paperwork. Probably trying to justify his right to be there on a road that had never required justification before. And that was the moment I realized the full weight of what Vanessa had set in motion. She was not just claiming control, she was interfering with services, with access that extended beyond me, and that changed the scale of everything. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, the morning air carrying that mix of dust and engine exhaust, sharp and familiar, and I walked down at a steady pace, not rushing, not reacting, just present. The guard noticed me immediately, gave a small nod like we had already established roles in this situation, and I let him finish speaking to the driver before I stepped in. This road is private property, I said calmly, directing it to the driver, not the guard, keeping the tone even, factual, the way you speak when you know exactly where you stand. The driver looked between us, uncertain, caught between two versions of authority, one loud and visible, the other quiet but grounded. And that is where confusion lives, in that gap. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded copy of the survey. Not the whole file, just the section that mattered, the boundary line, clean, clear, with the county seal printed in the corner, and I held it out just enough for him to see. No explanation, no argument, just evidence. He leaned slightly, I scanning it quickly, and I could see the shift in his expression, subtle, but real. The kind of recognition that comes when something finally aligns with what you expected to be true. The guard shifted beside us, clearing his throat like he was about to speak again. But this time his words did not come out as confidently, because paper backed by record does something that repetition cannot. It grounds the conversation in something that does not change based on who is standing there. The driver nodded once, then put the truck in gear and rolled forward, slowly at first, then with more certainty as he passed the barricade, and the guard did not stop him, did not step in front, did not escalate, because he could not. There was nothing real behind his position, and for the first time since this started, I saw it clearly, not just the flaw in Vanessa's claim, but the way it would unravel, not in one dramatic moment, but in small, undeniable corrections like this, each one exposing the gap between what she had built and what actually existed. I stood there for a second longer, listening to the truck fade into the distance, the sound of tires on asphalt returning to something familiar, and I knew now exactly how this would end, not with an argument, not with a back and forth, but with the right authority stepping into that same space and asking one simple question she could not answer. Where is the easement? And when she could not produce it, everything else would fall with it. By midday, the pattern was clear enough that I stopped reacting to each individual move and started thinking in terms of sequence, because what Vanessa was doing was not random. It was structured, layered, and predictable once you stepped back far enough to see it. And that was when I made the call that shifted everything from observation to coordination. I reached out to a surveyor I had worked with before, a guy named Daniel Reeves, someone who understood land the way I did, not just lines on paper, but physical space that could be verified, measured, defended. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the faint hum of equipment in the background, probably out on a site somewhere. I kept it simple, explained the situation without exaggeration, just facts, signs placed, access restricted, claim of shared use without any recorded easement, and there was a pause on the line, the kind that tells you someone is already running through the implications in their head. If there is no recorded easement, then they do not have a leg to stand on. He said finally, his tone steady, matter of fact, and that confirmation was not new information, but hearing it from someone whose entire job is to define boundaries gave it weight that mattered beyond my own understanding. I asked him to pull the official survey records again, certified copies, something that could not be dismissed or reinterpreted, and he agreed without hesitation, said he could have it ready by the next morning. From there, I made a second call, this time to the county clerk's office, navigating through the usual automated prompts until I reached someone who could actually access parcel records. I gave them the property number, waited while keys clicked in the background, the faint echo of an office line carrying through the phone, and then the answer came back. Exactly the way I expected, no easements, no shared access agreements, no filings of any kind that would grant external control over that road. Clean title, uninterrupted ownership. I asked them to email me a certified record extract, something official, something stamped, and they said it would be sent within the hour. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, listening to the distant sounds outside. Another vehicle approaching, slowing, reacting to the same illusion that had been built over the past 2 days. But now it did not feel uncertain anymore. It felt contained, like a problem that had already been solved but not yet revealed. When the email came through, I opened it immediately, the document crisp, clear, bearing the county seal in a way that no HOA letterhead could replicate, and I added it to the growing stack on my table, aligning it with the survey, the deed, every piece reinforcing the same truth from a different angle. This was not just my understanding anymore. It was documented, verified, backed by systems that did not bend to assumption or repetition. And that was when the final piece of the plan settled into place. Not confrontation, not escalation, but presentation. Putting all of this in front of the one authority that operated above both me and Vanessa, someone who would not be influenced by confidence or performance, someone who would ask the one question she could not answer and expect a real response. And I knew exactly who that needed to be, because once the right person stepped onto that road and saw what she had done, the difference between what looked official and what actually was official would become impossible to ignore. I did not call immediately. I waited until the timing was right, because timing matters just as much as evidence when you want the outcome to land clean, and by late afternoon the road had reached exactly the point I needed, more signs, more confidence, more visibility. The illusion had grown strong enough that it looked real to anyone passing through, which meant when it was corrected, it would be seen just as clearly. I stepped back inside, gathered everything into a single folder, the deed, the certified survey from Daniel, the county record extract, and the printed copies of every notice Vanessa had sent, each one stacked in order, building a timeline she did not even realize she had created. I ran my hand across the top page, feeling the texture of the paper, grounding myself in something that did not shift based on opinion or presentation. Then I picked up the phone and made the call. The line rang twice before a dispatcher answered, calm, professional, the kind of voice that does not react to emotion, only information. I explained the situation clearly: private property, unauthorized access control, interference with utility service, And I kept my tone even, precise, because the way you present a problem determines how seriously it is taken. There was a brief pause as she processed it, then a few questions: location, any ongoing confrontation, any immediate risk. I answered each one directly, no exaggeration, no escalation, just facts. And then she said it: someone will come out to take a look. The words were simple, but they carried weight because they meant the next step was no longer in Vanessa's control. I ended the call and stepped back outside, the light starting to soften as the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the road. The signs standing in a neat, confident line like they had always been there. The security vehicle still parked in its usual spot, the guard leaning casually now, more relaxed than before, because repetition had done its job. He believed in the role he was playing. I walked down to the edge of the road and stopped, not crossing the line where the barricade stood, not interfering, just watching, letting everything remain exactly as it was, because the point was not to change it. The point was to let it be seen for what it actually was, a constructed authority with no foundation behind it. A few minutes later, I heard it before I saw it, the low, steady rumble of a county vehicle approaching from the main road. Different from the others, heavier, more deliberate, and the sound alone was enough to shift the air slightly. The guard straightened, posture adjusting instinctively, eyes moving toward the direction of the noise, and I stayed where I was, still, grounded, knowing that everything up to this point had led to this moment. Not a confrontation, not an argument, but a simple review by someone who did not care about signs or confidence. Someone who would look at the same road, the same setup, and ask the only question that mattered: where is the authority for this? And when that question landed, there would be no room left for interpretation, because I had already made sure the answer was waiting. The county truck rolled into view slowly, tires pressing into the edge of the asphalt with a weight that felt different from everything else that had come through that road over the past 2 days, steady, deliberate. And when it came to a stop just short of the barricade, the engine idled with that low, consistent hum that carries authority without needing to announce it. The door opened, and the sheriff stepped out, not rushed, not reacting, just present in a way that immediately shifted the space around him. His eyes moved first, not to me, not to Vanessa, but to the setup itself, the signs, the barricade, the security vehicle, taking it all in like a problem to be understood rather than a situation to be managed. The guard straightened instinctively, adjusting his stance, but did not step forward this time, did not repeat the line he had been using all day, because something about the presence in front of him did not respond to rehearsed authority. Vanessa appeared moments later, stepping out from the side of the road with that same controlled confidence, clipboard in hand, sunglasses still in place, walking toward the sheriff like she had been expecting this, like this was just another conversation she would guide the same way she had guided everything else. "Officer, thank you for coming. We have been managing access control here for the community," she began, her tone smooth, measured, but the sheriff did not respond immediately. He raised a hand slightly, not dismissive, just enough to pause her, and then he spoke, calm, direct. "Where is the easement that authorizes this control?" The question landed clean, without emphasis, without accusation, but it cut through everything that had been built over the past 2 days. Vanessa hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause most people would miss, but I saw it, the first real break in her rhythm. She shifted the clipboard slightly, papers moving under her fingers, referencing community access, implied shared use, the same language she had been repeating, but this time it sounded different, thinner, less grounded, because it was no longer being accepted at face value. The sheriff waited, not filling the silence, not helping her complete the explanation, just standing there with that same steady presence. And after a moment, he nodded once, then turned his attention to me. "You are the property owner?" he asked, and I stepped forward, holding out the folder I had prepared. "Yes, sir," I said, keeping it simple, and he took it, flipping it open, scanning the top pages. The deed, the survey, the county record extract, each one clear, official, aligned. He read for a few seconds, then closed the folder and handed it back, and without raising his voice, without making a scene, he turned back toward the road, walked up to the nearest sign, and placed his hand on the metal post. The air felt still in that moment, like everything had narrowed down to that single point of contact, and then with a firm, controlled motion, he pulled it straight out of the ground, the metal giving way with a dull, hollow sound as it came free, the sign tilting slightly before settling against the asphalt. And he stepped back, looking at the remaining setup with the same calm expression. "This is private property," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that there was no room for interpretation. And just like that, everything Vanessa had built over the past 2 days stopped looking official and started looking exactly like what it was, something placed where it did not belong, waiting to be removed. For a few seconds after the sign hit the ground, nobody moved. The air felt different, quieter, like something that had been stretched too far had finally snapped back into place. And Vanessa stood there holding her clipboard a little tighter now, her posture still straight, but no longer as certain. The kind of subtle shift you only notice when you have been watching someone closely from the beginning. The sheriff did not look at her right away. He moved to the next sign, gripping the post the same way, steady, controlled, pulling it free with that same dull metallic sound that echoed just enough to carry across the road. And each time he did it, the illusion weakened, piece by piece, until what had looked organized and intentional now started to look temporary, misplaced. The security guard took a small step back, then another, his role dissolving in real time as the authority he had been standing behind disappeared without resistance. No argument, no escalation, just correction. Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice still measured but thinner now. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, adjusting her stance, trying to recover the ground she had lost, referencing community planning, future integration, the same phrases she had used before, but they no longer carried weight, because they were no longer being accepted as fact. The sheriff listened for a moment, then shook his head slightly, not dismissive, just final. "There is no recorded easement," he said, simple, direct, the same conclusion I had already reached, but coming from him, it settled the matter in a way nothing else could. He gestured lightly toward the remaining setup. "This cannot stay here." And that was it. No long explanation, no debate, just a clear line drawn where it should have been from the start. The contractors who had been working earlier were gone now, but the materials remained, the posts, the signs, the barricades, all of it suddenly out of place, like props left behind after a performance that had ended. I stepped forward slowly, not rushing, not claiming anything, just standing where I had always stood, on ground that had not changed despite everything that had been placed on top of it. The sheriff glanced at me briefly, a small nod, acknowledgement without ceremony, then turned back toward his vehicle, his part in this already complete, because that is how real authority works. It does not linger, it corrects and moves on. Vanessa remained where she was for a moment longer, her eyes moving across the road, the cleared space where the signs had been, the absence more visible than the presence had ever been. And for the first time since this started, she did not speak, did not direct, did not reframe what was happening, because there was nothing left to reframe. The foundation she had built on assumption was gone, and without it, everything else had nothing to stand on. I could hear the faint rustle of paper as she lowered the clipboard slightly, the smallest sound, but it carried more than anything she had said over the past 2 days. It carried the realization that this was no longer hers to control, and as the sheriff's truck pulled away, the road settled back into something familiar, the quiet, returning, the space clearing, and what remained was not victory in the loud sense, not celebration, just the simple, undeniable return of what had always been true. This road was mine, and now there was nothing left standing that said otherwise. The next morning, the road felt like it used to again, not because anything had changed physically, but because everything that did not belong was gone. The air was quiet in that familiar way, no idling engines, no forced stops, just the steady sound of tires rolling smoothly over asphalt that had been laid with intention. And I stood there for a while, coffee in hand, watching the sunlight stretch across the surface in long, clean lines, the same way it had the day I finished it. And there was something about that silence that carried more weight than anything that had happened the day before, because it was not empty. It was restored, the kind of quiet that only comes after something unnecessary has been removed. I walked down the length of the road slowly, boots pressing lightly into the edge where gravel met pavement, checking nothing in particular, just moving through it, letting my eyes take in the details I had memorized months ago, the slight curve near the tree line, the way the drainage slope held after last week's rain, the clean edge where the asphalt ended exactly where I had planned it. All of it still there, unchanged beneath everything that had been placed on top of it. And that was the part that mattered most, because it meant the truth had not needed to fight. It had just needed to be seen. A pickup truck passed by, without slowing this time. The driver giving a small nod as he went through. No hesitation, no confusion, just movement. And I realized how quickly people adjust back to reality once the illusion is removed. How little time it takes for something false to disappear once it is no longer reinforced. I noticed the faint marks where the signs had been pulled out, small disruptions in the soil along the shoulder, temporary, already softening under the morning air, and they looked insignificant now, almost out of place, like they had never really belonged there to begin with. I crouched for a second, brushing a bit of loose dirt aside with my hand, feeling the compacted base underneath, solid, exactly as it should be. And I stood back up, taking a slow breath, the smell of clean air and warm pavement mixing in a way that felt familiar again. There were no letters waiting on my counter when I went back inside. No emails stacking up with warnings and claims. Just the same quiet space I had built this place for in the first place. And somewhere out there, I knew Vanessa would be recalculating, shifting her approach, maybe convincing herself this had just been a misunderstanding, but it did not matter anymore. Because the one thing she needed to make any of it real had never existed. And now everyone who mattered had seen that clearly. I set my coffee down and looked back out through the window at the road, uninterrupted, unclaimed, exactly as it had been designed. And I thought about how easily things can be taken if you let someone define them for you. How quickly a sign, a voice, a bit of confidence can reshape reality if it goes unchallenged. And then I thought about how simple it had actually been to undo it. Not with force, not with noise, but with patience, with documentation, with letting the truth stand long enough for the right moment. And as the light continued to move across the asphalt, I understood something I had not fully realized before. I did not win anything here. I just refused to let something that was mine be rewritten. And in the end, that was all it took.